Dear Michael, hey, congrats on launching your monster sculpting and cryptid folklore channel. You've made me want to return to a project that I abandoned years ago about swarms, like insect swarms. I'm interested specifically in what the human imagination pulls from when we try to imagine what swarms of non-biological machines might look like. Robot swarms, drone swarms. It's why I contacted you a little while back to ask whether these folk monsters, like the Ozark Howler, or the Cape Girardeau Batman, or the Snallygaster, all that great stuff on your channel, whether these were all individuals, or were there certain monsters that were sometimes observed in packs, or hordes, or swarms. Because when I try to imagine a horrifying monster, I don't usually think of a reclusive Bigfoot.
Welcome to the Himalayas!
For me, there's hardly anything more horrifying than a swarm. Even a swarm in a silly, awful movie with absurd CGI will stay with me for years after I've forgotten the rest of the film. So my interest in drone swarms specifically ignited a few years back when I watched the movie Star Trek Beyond for the first time. In this movie, the villain has this fleet of what looks like millions of small ships, so many that they behave almost like a high-tech swarm. And there it was. Something about it just got to me. It was an itch that I had to scratch. And I know you know as well as I do, as a scholar, it's always easier when an argument just hits you fully formed. But sometimes you just become interested in something. You don't know what you're going to say. You don't have a thesis. In this case, I didn't even have a question, and I still don't have an answer. I just knew I had to scratch that itch. So anyway, I didn't have to do too much digging to discover drone swarms in other movies too. And on one level, it's easy to guess a few good reasons as to why this imagery might be proliferating right now. Well, from a spectacle perspective, looking at thousands of small things all moving independently probably thrills the eye in the same way that any form of kinesis does, from flying debris to crashing cars, explosions, bullet hell games. From a historical technological perspective, this imagery could be both thrilling and terrifying because autonomous machines of warfare and surveillance are already with us, and it seems like it's maybe just a matter of time before large groups of kill drones could be a part of warfare, or could show up anywhere. And of course, those fears and thrills naturally enhance the paired awe and dread that goes with the sight of any giant collection of insects or fish or birds or mammals all moving in a swarm together. Countlessness in motion is the sublime. But my true fascination with the drone swarm kicks in just a bit past all those concerns. Somewhere at the intersection of biology, math, and aesthetics, I'm interested in where these images come from. On the one hand, they obviously take inspiration from natural swarm patterns, as Peter Chiang, who runs the VFX house Double Negative, told Michael Goldman in his Studio Daily podcast.
Yeah, we always draw upon the real life situations in order to explore. And we looked at birds, starlings, murmuration. We looked at shoals of fish, sardines as they form these balls in water, and how sharks attack. There's a kind of defense mechanism.
These aesthetics probably also represent the next evolutionary leap of the aesthetics of the dogfight in cinema, from Howard Hughes's completely over-the-top climax of Hell's Angels back in 1930, which involved over 100 pilots, 3 of whom were killed during filming, to the groundbreaking optical printing work compositing dozens of separate elements in The Return of the Jedi, all the way up to modern CGI, which can model nearly limitless objects inside of a computer. But it's upon that new terrain of modeling, mathematical modeling, writing an algorithm to govern the virtual object's behavior, where it became necessary to invent something new. After all, this isn't a natural swarm, it's a drone swarm. And because of that, emergent formations in that swarm probably shouldn't look like any from the natural world.
When Krull sends an order to take out a nacelle stem or attack the neck, if you notice in the film, they start off very organic. And then we wrote some code in Houdini that turns it into a mathematical program where they would start to form chevrons or blades or a drill bit, so that the organic quality takes on a more harder, more uniformed attack.
As I see it, this is the historical transformation that's happening. Filmmakers for most of the 20th century had 2 basic ways to approach putting high-concept action and adventure on screen. First, they could do live-action stunts, which involve real objects and real physics. But stunts are limiting. You can fly a plane, but not a spaceship. You can leap onto a real horse, but not onto a real dragon. So, to bring sci-fi and fantasy to the screen, effects pioneers created a range of techniques, including model building, stop-motion animation, puppetry, in combination with optical printing or rear projection to make it seem like human actors shared a space with the fantastical. But in all cases, these techniques failed to imbue the monster or the spaceship with credible physics, because that wasn't really possible. But now, VFX artists create their monsters and spaceships inside physics engines, which means that even though they're creating virtual objects, they are giving them, in a sense, real physics. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but that last part is the crucial transformation here. Since the math is real computed math, then the physics that determines the behavior of these virtual objects is, in a sense, real. It's just running in a simulated environment. And so, sometimes pretending to do something actually involves doing a big part of that thing. Which is to say, getting back to Star Trek Beyond, that in order to bring to the screen a vision of a drone swarm, the VFX team essentially had to program control software for a drone swarm. And here, I worry that perhaps these efforts may be exerting a kind of creative pressure on reality.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
We're science. We're all about coulda, not shoulda.
Marshall McLuhan famously argued that no technology is good or bad. A technology is merely the field of possibilities that its existence unlocks. And so this trend nowadays to attach lights to drones and organize them into some dazzling spectacle dancing in the sky, that's not to use them for good. In a way, it's a denial of their use in surveillance and warfare, and it's a disavowal of how autonomous drones will actually function. I mean, we won't be able to control them. That's the whole notion of autonomy. And furthermore, it's the nature of emergent behavior. You can't predict emergence. We never could have predicted the shape of a starling murmuration by just studying a single starling, or even a dozen or 100 starlings. As the Cold War military maxim goes, quantity has a quality all its own. Quantity changes things. You might be able to predict how one drone will behave, but thousands in the same place at once reacting to each other? No. And so to manage this very real threat of emergent behavior, swarm films often reach for the deus ex machina escape hatch that I will call the fantasy of central control. It's right here in Star Trek Beyond. These ships are not autonomous, but are centrally coordinated with messages sent on a certain frequency that can be jammed with loud Beastie Boys music, which instantly renders a nearly incomprehensible foe utterly neutralized. Ta-da! In fact, this trope is all over the place, anywhere where we desire an instantaneous, flashy, cinematic solution that allows us to avoid the real terror of emergent behavior. We see the command ship or leader defeated, all the troops instantly die, but not only do they die, they break, they collapse to the ground, or they simply explode. Now, to back up a little bit, central control is, of course, fundamentally authoritarian. But I can't deny that whether I want to or not, I also find it to some extent comforting. I'm not proud of this, but it's why the Beijing opening ceremonies in 2008 were thrilling rather than alarming. And the same goes for the orchestration of bodies into mass spectacle, whether we're talking about Nazi Germany or North Korea. I know the truth of the brutality against the human body in those dictatorships, and I know that these public displays both hide but also darkly echo that truth. But I can't help but be drawn in by the spectacle. Perhaps it's because I've lived in capitalism my whole life that I find the efficient control of the masses, what Siegfried Kracauer of course famously called the mass ornament, to be somehow reassuring, or even beautiful. And of course, to make matters worse, the very same regimentation of countless bodies has been a central feature of our society of the spectacle for as long as I know. For instance, when I searched for this clip of the Rockettes, YouTube actually suggested this video of dominoes toppling. It's like even their algorithm knows that the pleasures here are comparable. These fantasies of central control attempt to quell the threat of emergence, and the near ubiquity of the mass ornament points to what must be a very common anxiety, that is, that uncontrolled humans are the most formidable swarm of all. Now, I don't want to get all the Matrix on you here about humanity being a virus, but humans display the greatest breadth of emergent behaviors in the whole natural world. One of the great questions of philosophy, it seems to me, has to do with our ability to think about emergence at the metasocial level. That is, to ponder how our combined actions give rise to a kind of new organism made out of countless individuals. The question is whether we can be really honest with ourselves about the relationship between the individual and the aggregate actions of all individuals. So I think that people who answer this question dishonestly will see themselves as ordered and rational, and they'll see the other classes, other races, other nations, they'll see them as the swarm. Most literally, this shows up in Nazi propaganda equating Jewish people with rats. But these days, the sledgehammer editing isn't even necessary to make the racist point. It's sufficient to just put the camera on the outside of the group, far away, usually up at a high angle, until the individuals disappear into the mass. And then ideology just takes care of the rest. Now, I'm certainly not saying that these images, or images like them, are racist, far from it, but racist ideology incorporates them so seamlessly that those participating in racist discourse, and that includes nearly all of us to some degree, are very likely to automatically believe that bigotry is inherent to these images, or that these images rationalize racism. See, I told you all foreigners were dangerous, this proves it! Incidentally, these night vision surveillance images are from a documentary called Those Who Jump, in which a pair of European filmmakers traveled to Morocco to learn about the situation outside the North African Spanish enclave of Melilla. First, a little background. There might be legal ways to immigrate from Africa to Europe, but if you're poor, none of them are available to you, obviously. So what happens is groups of hundreds of men will mass at night on Mount Garuga, which is just outside of Melilla, to storm the border fence with the logic that if enough of them try all at once, some of them will get through. The filmmakers went to Mount Garuga and recruited Abu Bakr Sibidi, one of the men trying to get across, to film a diary of his life in the camp. The film cuts back and forth between intimate scenes of everyday life and these oppressive police images of the jumps, trying to help us remove whatever distorting lenses of racism might still be stuck in our eyes. And it sort of works. We sort of contextualize these night vision images differently. And so, later on, when we watch a film like World War Z, and we see the zombies swarming to flow over a border wall, I think we might be right to ask, wait a minute, what are these images about? Because a zombie film is always simultaneously about us and about them. Like in Dawn of the Dead, for instance, the shambling undead mall zombies darkly reflect our own consumerism. But World War Z? I'm pretty sure these images are directed the other way, and not constructively. That's why I think that if we answer those philosophical questions about individuals and the mass honestly, we won't conclude that hell is other people, but the opposite, that hell is ourselves, that we're the swarm. And thankfully, this is a long-running trope in swarm films or swarm-adjacent films, that is, to position humans as the foil to the swarm. Going back unnecessarily far, in 1925's Seven Chances, Buster Keaton's character is fleeing a mob of women all wishing to be his wife to cash in on his inheritance, and twice in the film Keaton faces counter-swarms, a swarm of bees, and then hundreds of rocks in a rock slide. In both cases, he gets to choose which way to go, and in both cases, he deems the humans to be more dangerous. In 1927's Chong, a herd of elephants laying waste to a village is directed into a waiting trap. But then, as the humans who are waiting on the catwalks above proceed to spear the captured elephants, I have to reflect again on which swarm, the elephants or the humans, are more dangerous. 70 years later, we get Verhoeven's quasi-ironic adaptation of Robert Heinlein's crypto-fascist novel Starship Troopers. In this film, after endless battle scenes spent trying to genocide an insectoid race on a distant planet, the humans are finally victorious. And in that moment, with the brain bug defenseless in the middle of the crowd, we suddenly see it. The humans, a uniform mass, covered in armor, each outfitted with deadly weaponry, the humans are just as much a swarm as the bugs. And I don't think that the equation of human equals swarm has ever been done better than it was in the 2016 Black Mirror episode, Hated in the Nation. In this one, swarms of metal bees designed to save Britain from colony collapse disorder, but secretly patched into the national security network, begin to... Actually, you know what? If you haven't seen this one, I really hope you'll check it out. It's completely incredible. But suffice it to say that if there's an argument in here, here it is. The swarm is terrifying because we are the swarm. So much of what humans do is emergent and undirected and horribly destructive. Pick practically any example from the era of late capitalist globalization. For instance, the container ship, the unconscionable carbon footprint, the destruction of ocean habitat from pollution, and the thousands of unsecured containers that simply fall into the sea every year that they don't even go back for, the madness of shipping pears across the Pacific Ocean twice because it's somehow a little bit cheaper. We are the most dangerous animal in the world. And the worst part is that most of our destructiveness wasn't even a conscious choice. To a great extent, it's not something we can opt out of. No single person or even small group of people chose it or orchestrated it, and no one, no matter how aware they are of the meta-system of interlocking emergent systems, seems to be able to stop it. But the human swarm, all of us, also produce wonders apart from individual control or direction. The whole nature of creativity is that it's an acentric community endeavor, everyone learning from, borrowing from, and building on everyone else's work. And so, to bring it all back to the beginning, the swarm of human storytelling is how we get authorless legends. That is, folklore monsters, the thing you study. Mysterious campfire monsters, not something overwhelming, uncountable, inescapable, but something solitary, elusive, even noble. In a sense, the social swarm of folkloric storytelling cannot bear to replicate itself in the story of a swarm. Swarms are to be avoided, but Bigfoots are to be pursued. So, as the cultural network of retellers weaves descriptions and incidents of monsters, it reiterates the comforting myth that we'd like to keep believing about ourselves. The myth of the individual. Solitary, elusive, even noble. It is not who we actually are. But, beneath the harmless goosebumps, it must give us great comfort to imagine it. Best wishes in the new year, Michael, for your teaching, your channel, your art, all of it. Sincerely, Max Talene.
So let's see what we can get. Right? Right? Timing. You were just waiting for me to give up, weren't you?